Hello everyone, this week's video is coming from a slightly damp Edinburgh hotel room, and this week I wanted to have a little chat about Brexit, and its effect on pet passports. So if your dog or cat has got a pet passport, this video really is aimed at you and what might happen next year, specifically next March. You may have seen that there is some advice has been published by the government regarding what's going to happen, or what might happen, I should say. So at the moment, the situation is we're a member of the EU, which means that the possession of a pet passport for your pet means that they can come and go to EU countries and various other listed countries with this document. I wish they had never called it a passport. It's not really a passport as we know it. A passport is very much tied to your nationality, and dogs and cats don't really have nationalities. It's a health certificate. It's a health certificate which essentially tells the country that they're going into that certain conditions have been made. So for instance, they've had certain wormers, certain vaccinations, specifically rabies vaccinations, etc., etc. And there are still a couple of conditions attached to it. So for instance, when you come back into the UK, they must be wormed 1 to 5 days before they come back into the UK if they've been to a country where tapeworm hasn't been eradicated. So what does this mean when we're leaving the EU? Well, as they always say, hope for the best but plan for the worst. In the sort of pet travel scheme at the moment, if you are an EU country, the passport is enough. However, there are a small number of third countries, listed third countries, that you can go to with the pet passport and come back to the UK without having to fill in additional paperwork. I guess I never hear the term first or second countries, but I'm assuming like first country is the country that you're in, and second country is an EU country, and a third country is a non-EU country. So in March, when we come out of the EU, if we come out of the EU, we will be a third country. We won't be an EU country, we will be a third country. And there are 3 classes, really, of third countries. The first one is that we managed to get an agreement to be a Part 1 listed third country. That essentially means that nothing changes. The pet passport document itself might change a little bit, and I don't know whether we'll have to reissue the pet passports that we have, or they'll say they're fine, don't worry about it. Just when you come around to reissue, you'll need to get a new document which won't say EU on it, it'll say UK on it. But essentially nothing changes. None of the rules change. You can still come and go as much as you want with your dog or cat or ferret, and you just have to obey the 1 to 5 days before they come back into the UK. They get a wormer. The second option is that we become a Part 2 listed third country. Now, that essentially means that the pet passport scheme still applies, but there may be other conditions to go through with the pet passport. So essentially, the regulations wouldn't change. You'd still need to have a microchip, still need the rabies vaccination and the worming. However, you would probably need to come in to see someone like me, an official veterinarian, veterinary surgeon, I should say. Veterinarian is a US term. An official vet. That means I've been recognised by the government as a local veterinary inspector, and you would get a document from me, a health certificate, which would be valid for 10 days from the date of issue, and would be valid for 4 months for onward travel within the EU. But the requirements wouldn't necessarily change to what we have now. There would just be this additional bit of paperwork, which would be a bit of a pain to have, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. The final category is an unlisted is an unlisted third country. So we've had Part 1 listed, Part 2 listed, and then we have an unlisted third country. That essentially puts us in with the rest of the world, and means that there would be much more onerous regulations around taking your pet abroad. So you would need to have a health certificate, which is a document issued by me, but critically the EU would insist on having a blood test to ensure that the rabies vaccination has worked. What does that mean in practice? Well, the blood test is taken 3 months after the date of the rabies vaccination, at least 3 months after the date of the last rabies vaccination. So let's assume you're like the vast bulk of the clients that we have in the practice who have never had a rabies blood test. Used to have a rabies blood test back in the dim and distant past. If you've had one in the last 3 years, because rabies vaccinations last for 3 years, you wouldn't need to do it again. But let's say they've had a rabies vaccination and no blood test, which is the vast majority of people now that have a pet passport. Your pet would need to have a rabies blood test, and that would take a few days for the results to come back. If you don't have a pet, you can do that now. If they've had a rabies jab within the last 3 years, we can do that now, and then we would issue all the correct documentation based upon that. However, this is to the people, the reason why I'm making this video now is because there are some people who want or perhaps need to take their animals abroad in March next year and don't have any documentation right now. So for those people, they need to have a rabies vaccination now, and then they need to wait 3 months, which will take us through to sort of February. Then they will have to have a rabies blood test taken. We get the results back in a few days, and then they'll have to apply for an export health certificate, an export animal health certificate. So the potential, if you need to take your animal abroad after March the 29th next year, there is a potential, we all know there's a potential that no agreement may have been made at that point. You need to start getting your rabies vaccination now, so you can wait the 3 months to get the blood test, so then you can get the animal health certificate. Hope this clears up some of the confusion. Just to recap, when we come out of the EU, if we come out of the EU on March 29th next year, we will clearly leave the EU grouping of countries which the pet passport applies to, and we will become a third country. There are 3 classes of third country. Part 1 listed, no real change. Part 2 listed, no real change in requirements, but you will need to have an export health certificate when you go abroad to the EU. And there is being an unlisted third country, which is kind of the worst case scenario, in which case we'll have much higher health requirements and to go into EU countries. Any questions, any comments? It is a very complicated thing, and I'll try and paste some of the government's briefing notes into the description of this video. But if you've got any queries about it, please pop them in the comments section below. Thanks very much. Bye.